Welcome for everybody who's just joined us. My name is Elizabeth Hodges, and I've been at the Genealogy Center for a few years now. Before I came here, I had a master's degree in both library science, but before that, I have a master's actually in Irish history. So I have a big love for Irish history and doing Irish genealogy. It is kind of my bread and butter. We're going to try to fit all the content of this program in 1 hour. So we'll see how that goes. But if there are questions that you have that we don't get to, please send us an email for that. But we will try to get through some questions. All right, so let's go ahead and jump on in. So today, what we're going to do first is we're going to go through some of the challenges of doing Irish genealogy research. We'll talk a little bit about the historical context for doing Irish genealogy. There is a lot. History definitely informs on whether or not we can or cannot find things. And we'll go really deep into the essential online resources for doing Irish genealogy and go over some of those tips and strategies for doing Irish genealogy research. So let's jump on in. First, challenges in Irish genealogy research. There are some big ones. First being, we lost a lot in 1922. When the Irish Civil War began, it began with the attack on the Four Courts building. So that is where the Public Records Office of Ireland was, but they were also storing munitions in the building. So for those who want to know more about the Irish Civil War, Google is your friend, but we lost a lot of materials. There's also an incomplete civil registration from prior to 1864. So civil registrations we'll get into a little bit more, but those are going to be your births, marriages, and deaths. Also, there are very common surnames and naming patterns. How many Joseph Moores exist out there in the world? Also, changing of place names and jurisdictional boundaries, it can be a little bit confusing, but a big challenge is just mass immigration, leading to records being scattered across multiple countries. So we have a lot working against us, but that doesn't mean it is impossible. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about Irish immigration patterns. So these are some of the historical big waves of Irish immigration. So the early immigration are going to be your Ulster Scots. They're coming in the 18th century. This usually was motivated by religious and economic motivations. A lot of them came to colonial America. There's also a big post-Revolutionary War surge as well. And then we have the famine and the post-famine era. During the famine, about 1 million people die. Another 1 million to 2 million people leave Ireland. A lot of them are primarily poor. A lot of them are very rural Catholic people. But this didn't end with the end of the famine in the early 1850s. It will continue on for generations after that. So to put it in perspective, between 1845 and 1921, about 5 million people left. So that's a lot of people. But when we get to the later 19th century and early 20th century, more of the people coming over are going to be a little more educated. A lot of them will be literate by that point, maybe have more skilled professions than some of the earlier generations who might have been primarily unskilled laborers. And there's just kind of a greater geographic distribution. You'll have more people kind of spread out across the country and in other places too, which you can see on the right. So on the right, it's just giving you some basic places in the United States, major ports of entry, and other places that people went to, because they didn't just come to the United States and Canada. They went to Australia, New Zealand, Argentina, Brazil, South Africa. They kind of went all over. So Irish immigration records, there are things you can look for. So primarily, you're going to want to look for both departure and arrival records. As far as passenger lists and ship records for departure records, very limited Irish departure lists arrive. There are some departure lists that you'll see leaving from Liverpool. Those can be found on Find My Past. The National Archives of Ireland, they do have some things as well. Additional departure resources, you're going to see things like newspaper notices of departures, which I'll show an example of that a little bit later on. Missing friends advertisements in newspapers like the Boston Pilot, all kinds of things like that. Now, in the United States, we have a little bit more to work on. So a lot of people are really eager, especially Irish Americans specifically, to jump the pond too early. Don't jump the pond too early, friends. If you keep seeing records after records saying that your person is just simply from Ireland, keep digging. You want to look for, if you can't find a passenger list, try looking for naturalization records. Look at the census, particularly those after 1850. It might give you some ideas, especially like 1910, for example, when somebody immigrated. State, county, and vital records. So your birth, marriages, and deaths. Occasionally you will see a death certificate that will have more than just Ireland. I was actually looking at one earlier today that specifically said Waterford. You'll want to also look at Irish American newspapers. Maybe in the area they lived, there are county clubs, county fraternal organizations that maybe your person was in. You definitely also want to look at your church records, especially if they're Catholic, because those Catholic records, they can be really juicy, right? So do your due diligence and look through everything in the United States before you try to cross the pond. But there are some other things to look through as well. Things like military service records, employment records. There are also Irish benevolent societies out there as well, some of which are online, some of them aren't. So some of these things you will have to contact local libraries, university libraries, all that good stuff to find some of these things. Before we get started with the next phase of this presentation, I want to show you pictures of these three people. These people are going to be the subject of most of our examples. So all the way on the right over here, this is actually my great-grandmother, Margaret McCann, and my great-grandfather, Samuel Nevin Hodges. And this woman, Marguerite Nagle Moore, she is not related to me. I've been researching her heavily since I was doing my first graduate program. She's been my white whale, so to speak, for 8 years. I will never stop researching this woman. So a lot of the examples we'll see today are from the three of them, because everything we'll talk about, you can't find all those things for one individual. So we'll get kind of a little variety with the three of them. I mentioned passenger lists. So the first one I want to show you is a really, really detailed one. So this is for my great-grandmother, Margaret, or Maggie Ann McCann. So she came to the United States in 1916. It was less than a year after the Easter Rising. A lot of it had to do with the fact that Dublin was burning. She was working as a domestic servant in Dublin. And her future husband, my great-grandfather, Samuel, he had already immigrated to New Orleans. He got off the boat. He worked for United Fruit Company. They stopped in New Orleans. He got off the boat and he stayed and sent money back. So these early 20th century passenger lists are super, super detailed, because not only does it give her name, her age, all this good stuff, occupation, but it also will say last permanent residence. Ballsbridge, this is a suburb of Dublin. It's actually pretty upscale, but if she was working as a domestic servant, as it says up here, that makes sense. She was probably living in the place that she worked. And it also lists her parents' names, Mr. and Mrs. F. McCann, and it says where they are living in Enniskillen. Now, if we go to the next page, it will say final destination, Louisiana, New Orleans, which is where I'm originally from. Who paid for her passage? Sam Hodges. And then whether going to join a relative or friend, and if so, what relative or friend, and his name and complete address. This says intended down here, and it says Samuel Nevin Hodges, and it gives his address. So pretty cool. Now here's the thing though, not every passenger list is going to be super detailed like this. So this is the one for Marguerite Moore, who I mentioned earlier. She came over in 1884 with 3 of her kids. So she would have been, I believe, a widow at this point. So she was 37 and she came over with her teenage daughter. So Miss Philomena, and then we have a Master Thomas, and then Miss Clara. There were some other kids that were adults that would come over a little bit later, but this one, not super detailed. But I knew it was her because it lined up with the names and ages of her kids from records I was seeing in the United States on the census and other things. So it lines up. Naturalization. So this naturalization is for my great-grandfather, Samuel Nevin Hodges. This one is super detailed. This is from 1921. This is his petition for naturalization. It's listing what boat he came on, when it came over. But here's the thing. Okay, so this says the Cedric. He was actually, like I said, working for United Fruit Company. So they actually would have called him a deserting alien seaman. So this was in this packet for his naturalization records, both of which I found on Family Search. So he says when he came in, but he didn't go through Ellis Island like a lot of immigrants would. In fact, his ship did stop at Ellis Island just to drop off some stowaways, but they did not have the crew go through Ellis Island. So he was essentially an undocumented immigrant, to put it bluntly. But remember, not all records are going to be super detailed. This varies era to era. So Marguerite Morris, she naturalized, well, she filed this declaration of intent back in 1887. This is the only information. The only reason why I'm sure that it's her is because I had her on a city directory living at this address at one point, and I happened to have another record that had her signature, and this is her signature. So I'm going to say it's probably her. But again, not everything is going to be as detailed. So you just need to remember to be patient. You also, like I said, you want to look at those census records. So this is the 1910 census for Marguerite and her family. So we have Marguerite. They have her down as Margaret, her daughter Philomena. And then we have her other daughter, Margaret, who was also Marguerite. And then we have Thomas P. So Thomas Patrick, he was 34. So we have a 34-year-old son, 36-year-old daughter, another daughter who is 40, and then Marguerite is 61. Now, if we go further down, I find it interesting that they put in these columns like Ireland, Gaelic, which that I think had to do with the fact that Marguerite was big into Irish politics, and it would have been kind of a nationalist thing for her to tell the enumerator this specific thing. I'm Irish, but I am like ethnically Irish. I'm not Anglo-Irish. It's an interesting thing, but that's something that's different, enumerator to enumerator. But if you go a little further down, you will also see her occupation, where she works, all that good stuff. And I'm realizing now that this PowerPoint, one of these actually cut off the year she immigrated, but it does say on here the year that she immigrated, which would have been 1884. This is where that column is. But yeah, so that's why you want to look at these census records. So here's some just key online resources for Irish immigration, right? We'll talk about all these at various points in different capacities, and all this information is in the handout. So these are all very good for different things. Ancestry has some great passenger lists and naturalization records. There's also the Boston Pilot Missing Friends collection. We also have Find My Past, which has the New York Archdiocese Catholic records. They have other various immigration record collections on Find My Past. They are doing the Birch Newspaper Archive in partnership with Find My Past. So those kind of live together, if that makes sense. And I'll explain that a little more in a bit. But we also have Family Search. They have a ton of stuff. They have the civil registration indexes in addition to naturalization records and the passenger list. And you always want to look at newspapers for stuff like this. Always, always, always. But you always need to remember, history dictates what records exist and which records survive to the modern era. So this is just a really quick timeline of historical events that are going to affect genealogy research in some capacity. So in the 19th century, we get the Act of Union in 1801. So that's when we get the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland and Scotland. 1823 is when the tithe allotment books begin, which we'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes, but that's a good date to remember because the tithe allotment books are a really excellent census substitute when you don't have a census for this time frame. And then we get the famine era where a lot of people are going to die and a lot of people are going to leave. And it just kind of blows up record collection in that time frame. You also have Griffith's Valuation. That was being done between 1847 and 1846. And that also, like the tithe allotment books, will serve as a really good census substitute for the mid-19th century. 1864, we get the civil registrations. That's for everybody, that's all births and deaths. By the 1870s and 1890s, in that time frame, you'll have something called the land wars, which is basically tenant farmers fighting for their rights. So during the famine back in the 1840s, you had mass evictions. During the land wars, you had people trying to grant these tenant farmers more rights, but you did have a lot of people being evicted. So people were moving around a little bit as a result. So that's going to affect how you find your stuff, how you find records. Once we get into the 20th century, 1901 is the first surviving census we have for Ireland that is complete. For Americans, by comparison, that's really depressing, but it is how it is. Those later 19th century ones, those were pulped during World War I for paper. And the ones prior to that only survived in fragments, and they were destroyed in 1922. 1911 is the last census we have access to until the 1926 census. They did not do one in 1921, and that is because of the Irish Civil War and the War for Independence. They just couldn't do it. We get the Easter Rising in 1916, and then the Partition of Ireland in 1921. And then we get the Civil War and the destruction of the four courts and the Public Records Office. So this is just a really basic timeline, but this gives you an idea of how each of these events are going to affect how we find records and what records still exist, and maybe why we're not finding things too. We're going to first address the elephant in the room, which is the loss of records. So as I said earlier, during the Irish Civil War, the anti-treaty forces, they occupied the Four Courts building, and which also had the Public Records Office of Ireland. And after a 2-day bombardment, there was an explosion that caught the roof on fire, and then we lost about 700 years of archival material. You had people who worked for the Public Records Office out digging through rubble, picking up papers, and just like dumping them in boxes, frantically trying to save things. So we lost a lot. So we lost those census fragments for these years between 1821 and 1851. We also lost pre-1858 wills. We lost Church of Ireland parish registers that were housed there. But a lot of these things that were lost, there were either substitutes or copies made. So you can still find things. So don't get super depressed by this point in the presentation. We do have things that survived over here, namely because they were either kept elsewhere or there were copies stored in other places. And then also there have been recovery efforts. The Beyond 22 project and the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland, that was released in 2022. That was a digital reconstruction using copies and transcripts and other things to try to reconstruct what was lost. It is the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland, I'm not going to lie to you, it's a difficult website to use. We're not going to go down in the weeds with that. There is a video on our YouTube channel where I did give a presentation on this. So don't stress out if you're trying to use that website and it's just not working for you. This is just what the website looks like when you go to it. I actually don't recommend searching here. And if you do, just search a last name. This is set up not for genealogists. It's just not. You do better to browse the treasury, but there's this very special way of doing it that is not the easiest. So like I said, check out that other program on our YouTube channel on using the Virtual Record Treasury that I did back when this thing came out. The other thing you need to understand is the hierarchy of Irish administrative divisions. I'm not going to dwell on this too long, but the big thing to remember is that records are organized by these divisions. And many surnames, unless it's something like Moore or Murphy, they are associated with specific areas. So we have our provinces. We have the 4 provinces: Ulster, Munster, Leinster, and Connacht. And then here's just like examples. I couldn't do it for every county, but within a province, you have a county. Within a county, you have a civil parish. And within a civil parish, you have townlands. So think of it like a Russian nesting doll. Another thing to keep in mind are Irish place names. How to understand them, how to research them. As far as the historical context of those go, they have evolved a lot. They were originally in Irish, the Irish language, I mean. They were anglicized starting in the 1600s. They often are spelled phonetically by English speakers, and then the name changed that way. And also administrative boundaries shifted over the centuries. Townland is the smallest land division, and there's about 60,000 that exist. So there's a lot of them. And this kind of gives you that breakdown again. These are some primary places to look into this online. The reason why I'm bringing this up is that you're going to have multiple spellings that are phonetic. The same names are going to appear in different counties, which is super confusing. Parish boundaries don't often match civil boundaries. Name changes after major historical events. It happened all the time. But the Irish Revival, which would have been in the late 19th century, led to the re-Gaelicization of some of these names. So reclaiming what those names used to be to make them more Irish, less English. So records may use different versions of the same places. So this is why maps are really helpful. This thing I mentioned right here, Shane Wilson's compendium, This is at swilson.info. Shane is actually a distant cousin of mine. My great-great-grandfather, he had a sister, and Shane is one of her descendants. But he has this really, really helpful website that is free to access that has these key databases that are amazing. So if you take a look at this later, I do have some stuff in the handout about it, but definitely look at Shane Wilson's compendium. I have links to all of these databases in here, but basically, if you don't know what registration districts are in a certain county, you can be given a handy dandy list, which is helpful because a lot of the databases where you would be looking for civil registrations of births and deaths, they're not organized by county, it's by registration district. So if you don't know what the district is, that makes things a little challenging. So definitely take a look at this later on. Now, I do want to show you some of those other websites. So this first one, I'm going to mispronounce this. Logain. Y'all see what this is. logainme.ie. Okay. Just to show you an example of how this thing works, I typed in Greencastle. There are many Greencastles in Ireland, but the one I was looking for specifically was in County Donegal, which is down here. But you notice in the search results, you'll have all the Irish variant spellings of the place name. So if I click on the one for Donegal, it will show you where it is on the map. So if you see it on a record and you're like, where on earth is this place? It will show you on a map and it will tell you, okay, so it's in the county of Donegal. It's in the barony of Inishowen East. It's in the civil parish of Moville Lower. It says what electoral district and the townland. So again, it's a bit complicated, but you do have tools to help you kind of get a handle on where certain places are. Now, John Grenham's website, so johngrenham.com, also known as Irish Ancestors, is a really good tool to use as well. The website I mentioned previously on this guy, this is free. I forgot to bring that up. A lot of these things I'm mentioning are free, or you can access them in libraries for free. Now, this guy, not entirely free, but this places button up here is free. The surname search, that will show you where, if you search a surname, it'll show you where that surname appears the most throughout the country. You can only do a certain amount of searches before you hit a paywall. So it's like a soft paywall, but places where we're going, that is free. Now, I have found that this page with the place name search in the county, the times I have tried using it, doesn't always work the best for me, but these links over here on the left, so civil parishes, Roman Catholic parishes, and then the Catholic and civil parishes overlaid. These are all mapping tools that are really, really helpful. So let's just take a look at one. First one we're going to look at is just the civil parishes. So when you click on that, you get the map like this. This is an interactive map. So I wanted to look at Donegal civil parishes. Oh. Now it looks like this, right? So it's broken it down, but if you zoom in and click on one, so I wanted to look at Moville, Upper Civil Parish. It shows you this map and you can click on these, but most importantly, look at this. So if you click on this, it will give you links to maps, links to things on like what are the most common surnames in that area? What are some of the adjoining parishes? List, if you click on this, a drop-down thing comes down that says list of places within there, and then research sources. We love lists of resources, right? So this is a good tool to play with. The next thing I was going to show you was Shane Wilson's compendium, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. This is his registration district map browse. Say you don't know what the registration district is, and you're looking for a civil registration of a birth. If you just put in the county and then click search, it will bring you to a page that just has the list. So you'll have the names of the districts, the county. Now notice this one, Ballyshannon, is technically in multiple counties. That's not confusing, right? And then the dispensary districts. I wouldn't worry too much about this. This is the stuff you need to concern yourselves with. For fun, I just clicked on the civil parish of Inishowen, which you will see a civil registration from Inishowen in a little bit. And it will tell you the civil parishes within there that are like next door, how many townlands, how many towns. So really fun tool to play with. And like I said a minute ago, it is free. I like free. Free is good. He has another database on his website called Townland Index and Database. This is from 1851. So you can search a townland by name using part of the name. You can use wildcards, SoundX, all that good stuff. Lots of fun to play with. So the next thing we're going to get into is research strategies. This should be something you are doing with all of your research anyway, which is begin with what you know. Start with what you know and work backwards. And as I said at the beginning, try not to jump the pond too early. If you haven't done enough research in the United States or Canada by extension, or anywhere else your Irish ancestors ended up, and they didn't stay in Ireland, you need to do more before you can try to go back to Ireland. Otherwise, you won't find anything. So how do you do this? Say you don't have a location, look at vital records, look at obituaries, naturalization papers, church records, local histories and newspapers. You also can look at DNA too, see if DNA gives you any clues. Then you want to start digging into those Irish records, which we're going to get into in just a moment. But most importantly, there's some really big brick walls, right? So some techniques for overcoming those brick walls, cluster research, which I'll have a fun little graphic for that. But that's basically meaning research everyone to death. And also look at, okay, so maybe these people from this one town migrated to a very specific place. So that's why you want to look at things like the broader historical context of the community and see if you can get some clues from there. Name variations, spelling doesn't count in genealogy anyway, but definitely keep that in mind when doing Irish research because you're going to have a number of different versions of some of these names. And you also want to look at anglicized versions of names as well and keep track of some of those boundary changes, how those might change over time. And you want to consider maybe some parish administrative shifts too. So those are things you can find just honestly by Googling. And that's where you start for some of that. And when in doubt, try DNA because you got it, you might as well use it. So cluster research, this is a lot of content. This slide is a part of the handout, but as I said, this is meant to help you overcome record loss issues. If you research everybody, so not just your person, but their neighbors, who they worked with, who they might have been traveling with, looking at their church, who were the godparents and witnesses on church records, look at their extended family, look at siblings and their families, look at your in-laws. There's so many things you should be doing. So look at everything. Look at land records, marriage records, church records, census, passenger lists, naturalization records, obituaries, even fraternal organizations, right? Sometimes you might find some of that stuff online in maybe a university archive. Sometimes you find that stuff other places in libraries. Maybe some fraternal organization membership lists were transcribed and then published into a publication. But also look at the newspaper for that too. We're not going to dwell on this too long because my colleague John actually has a program that was recorded that is on our YouTube channel on just researching naming patterns. But naming patterns are something that can give you clues as well. So, for example, a boy is often named after, the first son is named after a paternal grandfather. So, for example, my great-grandfather, Samuel Nevin Hodges, his grandfather was Samuel Hodges, but his grandmother, her maiden name was Nevin. So you do have consistent patterns. They really like their Irish naming patterns, especially the Catholics. Protestants do it to an extent too, but it's something to keep in mind when you're doing research. So look for recurring names when you're looking for names, period. Even if it is John Moore or Michael Moore, something that's really, really common, just try to keep track of it somehow. And you want to look at all the spelling variants of surnames and given names too. So like a woman whose name is Honora, she might go by Nora. She might go by Hannah. She could go by any number of variations of Honora. So you also want to keep an eye on middle names, as I said a minute ago. That will help you distinguish between people, but it could give you a clue as to maybe who that person's grandmother's maiden name is. So let's get into some of these record types. So we're going to go through some of the key ones first. So these are going to be your vital records, both your civil registration records and religious records. We'll talk about censuses and census substitutes, land records, court records, so wills, probate, higher court records, and newspapers. Let's start first with vital records. So this is just kind of the timeline of Irish registration records. So in the pre-civil registration era, you're not going to have an official state registration, not before 1864. Church records are your primary source for this. Their non-Catholic records for this time frame are a little sparse. So if your person is, say, Church of Ireland or some other flavor of Protestant, it's a little harder to find those things, especially online. But you will have things like the Poor Law Union records, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. There's also other kind of big things happening, like the famine. You do have Griffith's valuation. Now, this won't list every single person in a household. It's really just heads of household. But immigration records are really crucial for this time frame as well. Now, the early civil registrations, in 1864, we will have non-Catholic marriages. Those will begin actually a little bit earlier than 1864. Now, in 1864, we do also get all births, all deaths. This is a typo. Catholic marriages for the civil registration do not begin in 1845. That's the non-Catholic. That should have been swapped. Excuse me. You will also have things like superintendent registrars, but the things you really want to dig into are the births and deaths. Good date is 1864. If the person is Catholic, those begin in 1864. So ignore this word. If it's somebody who is Protestant, they will begin in 1845. And then we do get some changes in how these offices operate. Certain departments are separating off. So instead of having the General Register Office, you will later on get something called Groney, which is the General Register Office in Northern Ireland. So things change over time as things become a little bit more modern. As far as digital access goes, irishgenealogy.ie is perfect for the Republic. Now, if we are talking about researching births, marriages, deaths after 1921, you need to go to Groney or Prony, but Groney, which would be the General Register Office of Northern Ireland. But if it's a place that would become Northern Ireland later on, but it's not Northern Ireland in the time frame you are researching, you want to use irishgenealogy.ie. That is your friend. This is where most people are doing their research. Okay. Now, you can find some of these things, some of the civil registrations on Find My Past, Ancestry, and Family Search, but they don't have the images. And honest to God, I really don't like doing it on Ancestry, to be completely frank, because it doesn't give you much information. It doesn't even give you a link to irishgenealogy.ie where the registration actually lives. So a lot of people will save those records that don't have enough information on them. It just has like a year. It doesn't even say where the person is born. They'll save it to their trees, and it could be the wrong person if they don't go and check this website. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So this example is one of Marguerite Moore's children. I mentioned Marguerite Moore earlier. Her name is Philomena Mary Louisa Moore. She was born in 1864 in Clifton, but here's the thing. Clifton is not a civil registration district. It's a town. We don't even know where she was registered, just Ireland. There's no link. It doesn't say who her parents are. This could be anybody. I mean, yes, she has a very long name, but a lot of people don't have 4 names listed in the civil registration for their birth. That's a bit unusual. So I want to know if it's the real person. So I went to irishgenealogy.ie and I searched for her name. So let me go back a page. If you press advanced options, if you're searching for a birth, so if you put the person's name in, you put the year range, click off birth, you can put the mother's surname. But here's the thing, you can do it, but it might not help you either way, and I'll show you why. When I pulled up the record for Philomena, notice mother's surname, null. So even if you put the mother's maiden name in there, it might not actually help you any, but do it anyway, just for the sake of doing it. The This index page, not a lot of information here, but if you click on view record image, it will show you the actual image. So at the top, we'll see the registrar's district, all this good stuff. And then we have Philomena down here. So we have Philomena Mary Louise, or Louisa, I should say. The name of her father, John Henry Moore, says that he is living in Sline Head, which is a lighthouse in Clifton. So he was a lighthouse keeper. And then we have her mother's name, Margaret Adelaide Moore, formerly Nagel. Rank or profession of father, head lighthouse keeper in Sline Head, I should say. Signature, qualification, and residence of informant. So this woman, Catherine, I think this is Dungarvan, present at birth. So that's her qualification for knowing that this child was born. And it has the date of when she was registered and the registrar, which is not super exciting. But all the way on the left, we have the date, but you also have the exact location. So sometimes you'll have up here some kind of basic information, but if you look super closely here, this will give you like the smallest of smallest rural places that aren't even really towns, but you can then find them on maps. It really narrows down for you where somebody is from. To show you an example of a civil marriage registration. So this is my great-grandfather, Samuel Nevin Hodges. These are his grandparents, Samuel Hodges and Catherine Nevin. So they would have gotten married in the 1860s, well, actually 1854, excuse me. So they were Protestant. So this is an example of a marriage record from prior to when the Catholic ones began. So this is an early marriage that is on irishgenealogy.ie. So gives the names of the people getting married, their age, conditions, so marital status. He was in the Coast Guard at the time. They used to call it the Preventative Water Guard. They got married in County Cork in Blackrock, which is kind of near the city of Cork. And it gives the name and surname of their fathers and the profession of their fathers. So Samuel Hodges' father was a glassmaker and his wife's father was a gardener. And then it also gives you the witnesses, which Andrew Nevin, probably her father. So let's get into some of the Catholic records. So little historical context for the records. So prior to 1700, there are very few that have survived, but there are some. 1700 to 1750, limited records are kind of beginning. We're starting to get even more of them. Between 1750 and 1800, more parishes are keeping records, but it's still inconsistent. So if you're doing research in this time frame, it is a bit of a bear, but just know that there's a reason for it. It's not a reflection of you or your research skills by any means. But from 1864 onwards, you will have a direct parallel between the Catholic records and the civil registration. Are there exceptions to that? Absolutely. Sometimes you can find one and not the other. It happens, but by and large, there is that parallel. But you do have some historical challenges going on here. So you do have the penal laws, which are in effect until 1829. You also have poor record keeping conditions just in general. And you didn't really have a standardized format of how these records are being kept. So they varied parish to parish almost as far as what type of information is being collected and how it looks and how easy it is to find in the books. So as far as the types of records within these parish records, the big ones that we would need for genealogy are going to be your baptismal records, which give child's name, date of baptism, parents' names, including the mother's maiden name, which we all love, the names of the sponsors or godparents. Sometimes it gives the address, so maybe the townland. And we will also need things like marriage registers. Sometimes you'll see some burial and death registers. Those are a little less common. But the big ones really for us doing research from the United States or Canada or elsewhere are going to be your baptismal records and your marriage records. Are they online? Yes. How do you find them? Many ways. So these were all digitized by the National Library of Ireland. They microfilmed them and then they digitized them. So there's somewhere around a little over 1,000 parishes across Ireland. So this is going to be your baptisms and marriages. Now, they're unindexed images. You can find them, which I'll show you how to find them, but you will want to go to another website that has an index to search in them. Ancestry does have some selected original images as well. Find My Past has indexed directly the National Library of Ireland's records. Find My Past, in some more recent updates, they do have direct links that will bring you right to the National Library of Ireland's page, like to the page where the record is. Roots Ireland, that is another subscription website. It is helpful because it's kind of like a super index. Yes, it might not have the original image. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't, that means it wasn't microfilmed by the National Library of Ireland, which I'll show you an example of that in a moment. There are some parishes that are indexed on irishgenealogy.ie, but not a ton. And you can also search on Family Search as well. Let's go ahead and let me show you some examples. But this search tips, check the neighboring parishes when you can't find something. Search for variant spellings of people's names for sure. Look up all the Latin versions of the names that you can find in the Family Search Research Wiki. Look for clusters of related families in the area, all that good stuff. When able, cross references with civil records. So on Ancestry, the way I kind of pull this up, because there are a lot of different record collections that are Catholic for Ireland on Ancestry. So I went to Ancestry's card catalog. The way to do that is to press search and a drop down comes down and you can select card catalog. So I just typed Catholic and then I filtered it down by location to Ireland. So there are 13 specific collections to go through. I found things in multiple of these. Sometimes I found the same record in these different collections, which is a little annoying, but the ones I would go through first would be the Select Catholic Birth and Baptism Registers and the Select Catholic Marriage Registers. Those are the two I would go through first and then kind of go through the rest, because these are the ones that are going to have the most number of records in them. To show you that example of one that I did find, it was for a child of Marguerite Moore. So Marguerite Adelaide Moore and her husband, John Henry Moore, they had a daughter named Matilda, or Lila Matilda. She was born in 1872. And she was born in County Donegal in Moville, which we were talking about earlier. And you can see right here, we got the original image right there. It'll open up beautifully. Now, if you do this on Family Search is free. I like free. Free is amazing. So I just wanted to see what would come up if I search for Marguerite Nagel, which was her maiden name, and her spouse, John Henry Moore, just to see what comes up. So number of these ones on the top, at least these top three, are definitely some of their kids. So if I click on this first one, so she did have a daughter named Mary Jane. So this is actually the record for Mary Jane, but Margaret Nagel is mentioned. Notice Nagel is spelled a different way, and this is what I mean by variant spellings. Very important to keep in mind. But notice there's no image. So if I wanted to look at this one, I would then go to the National Library of Ireland's website. So I see that she's born April 1st, 1871. And it says she's born in Moville in Inishowen, which is, you know, the district, and in County Donegal. Now, when you go to the National Library of Ireland's website and you're on the page for Catholic parish registers, if you don't know the name of the parish, that's okay. Click on Search the Map. So it will bring you to a page that looks like this, where you can click on these different counties. So I clicked on Donegal, and then I was able to click on Moville. So that's in the Diocese of Derry. When you click on that, it brings you to this page where it'll show you what has been microfilmed and the date ranges. Sometimes if you say, some people I've helped before, they know kind of about where their people are from because that was passed on down the family line through family stories. And then they're saying, we can't find anything, we can't find anything. And then you go to this page and you see, oh, well, the time frame these people lived, it wasn't microfilmed. But in this case, it was microfilmed. So we're going to click on this guy up here. And this is what the page looks like. Now, this will have all of the records starting from 1847 through the time, the end of the reel, essentially. Because remember, it is digitized microfilm. So you can filter it down by what kind of record it is. So if it's baptism, that's what we're doing. You can then filter to the year and then the month. So when you press apply, it will bring the film all the way down to where you need to be. And for the sake of time, I just zoomed in. So you can see we have April 1st right here. And then we have Mary Jane, Margaret Adeline, and then we have John Henry Moore, her mother, Margaret Nagel. And then we have the witnesses and where they were living. Cool stuff. From there, you can download it. You can print it, whichever you prefer. Now, there are other people in Ireland who were not Catholic, right? So I do have a program on our YouTube channel on doing Quaker research. This is Methodist Quaker, but this guy right here is Quaker. Quaker research is a lot of fun for me, at least, because I find them interesting. But these records live on Find My Past. But most of these don't necessarily live online. For the Presbyterian records, you'll have to contact, well, you'll have to go to Prony, because most of the people who are Presbyterian, a lot of them are going to live in the north. But I do have more resources on where to find these Protestant records that aren't online. So that is all in the handout. So take a look at that. Church of Ireland. So where you would get that, either the Public Records Office, Northern Ireland, the Representative Church Body Library, they're going to have the bulk of things for the Church of Ireland. But a lot of that stuff has also been indexed as well. And you can see some of those indexed records on Roots Ireland. So Roots Ireland, like I said, it's a subscription website that I subscribe to personally for a few reasons. So just to show you a quick search, I searched Samuel Hodges, my great-grandfather. When you search for a name, it then lets you filter down to a county, but you can add mother's surname, father's surname, all that good stuff. It automatically searches variant spellings of these names. When I found him in this record. This is a Catholic record. I was not able to find this online. He was born in County Cavan, in the parish/district of Cavan. He was born in Cavan town in County Cavan, but that reel for these books for his particular baptism, it hadn't been microfilmed, it hadn't been digitized. The only place I can find it is here. He was 7 months old when this was done, because it was in the notes of the original record. So someone from Roots Ireland went and transcribed this. I love how the priest made a note to say the father is a Protestant and the father was a railway porter. And it gives his mother's name as Joanna Carroll, and then his father is Robert Hodges. But here's the thing. Joanna Carroll and Robert Hodges were not of the same denomination. So I have a second record for him, Samuel Neville, which again, spelling doesn't count in genealogy. His middle name was Nevin, so that L should be an N. But notice his year of birth is off. It's probably just an error in Roots Ireland. So you want to be squishy with dates always. And that's true for just doing genealogy, period. It looks like they were living in these cottages that were owned by the railroad company his father worked for. But he was baptized in Church of Ireland. So he was actually baptized in both churches, which is a bit unusual. We actually don't believe his parents ever married, because Joanna was Catholic and Robert was Protestant. So census and census substitutes. I'm going to try to fly through this because we don't have a ton of time. A lot of censuses were lost. You're going to find the good ones that are actually accessible for 1901 and 1911. Those are going to be on a couple of websites, but really the best place to look at them is for free on the National Archives of Ireland's website. We do have some primary substitutes, so that's Griffith's Valuation and the Tithe Allotment books. Those are going to be for the mid-19th century. They're only going to list male heads of household, though. There was a religious census. There were a couple of them. The only one that was partially survived is from the 1760s, which that kind of sucks, but it's not a complete set. And you also have other things like land evaluation books, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I want to show you an example of how you can find a census through Ancestry that actually lives on the National Archives of Ireland's website. So if you find somebody, this is my great-grandmother, Maggie McCann. This is the 1901 census. Oops, excuse me. If you scroll down this page a little bit, it will give you a link that will bring you directly to the National Archives website. Notice they're updating the website. If you click this, it just brings you to the new version of the website. But for now, that link will continue to work. You'll see the names of everyone in the family. But if you scroll down, view census images, this is the household return. So it's the actual filled out original image. Now, the other forms will show you other things. So this is which one is this guy? This is one of the other images. So this basically gives like religious profession. You can compare. So if you look at the original form for the household return, it'll say what number on the form, and it gives you all this good information. There's also house and building return. A lot of people might think, okay, who cares about this? But it'll say how many windows, how many rooms, how many doors, how many walls. It gives you an idea of how well off a family might have been. Down here, we have Felix McCann. That was her father. How many rooms, all that stuff. And this one is name of landlord. Notice next, this person, Anne McGuire, that was his mother-in-law. So she lived next door and she owned her house. She was not renting. But Felix, he was renting from someone. This is just what that new website looks like. I think this is in preparation for the hopefully soon release of the 1926 census. A good census substitute that I find really funny are the Ireland dog license registers. There's a joke that Irish Americans or just the Irish diaspora is so desperate for records because of such a big record loss that we'll look at anything, even dog licenses. So I searched for John Henry Moore, Marguerite Moore's husband. This is what the page looks like on Find My Past. So this is the index. It says he's living in Greencastle, in Moville, and County Donegal. If you look at the original image, it's just the same information, just on the original image. So here he is down here, how many dogs he has, what is their breed, all that good stuff. Who cares about the dogs? But it does put someone in a place at a time, which is really cool because this was from 1870, which we don't have a census for 1870. I mentioned that there was a religious census. That partial reconstruction of this census is on the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland's website. I had searched for the name Hodges. I did find one. If you click on this button, view digital content, it brings you to the first page of 27, but it doesn't show you exactly who you're looking for. You have to press the search button in the viewer to find who you're looking for. Griffith's Valuation. This is a comprehensive value of property in Ireland. Like I said, it lists the heads of household and who is leasing the information. The best place to look at Griffith's Valuation is not Ancestry.com. It is not Ancestry.com because it does not give you a date, because this is a time frame. This is more than 1 year that these were being done. So Ancestry, I don't like it. Go to Ask About Ireland, which I'll show you in a moment. That website is free. It's great. It also has maps linked to it. Tithe allotment books, these are records of tithes, so taxes essentially that were being paid by, paid back to the Church of Ireland by people who weren't Church of Ireland members. So it lists the land occupiers, not necessarily laborers or urban dwellers, which is not fantastic, but it's something. Those are on the National Archives of Ireland's website. It's a good pre-famine population record, but it does have some problems with searching because when it was indexed by people who were not from Ireland or could even read the handwriting. So it has its own spelling issues and quirks, but you just have to play with it. So Ask About Ireland, if you honest to God, just do a Google search, Griffith's Valuation, Ask About Ireland, you should find this page. There is a link in the handout. To show you an example, I searched, instead of Nagel, actually, the example I showed was actually Hodges, and I put in County Wicklow and left the rest of this blank. So we have the occupier's surname, forename, county, parish. So this is my guy, Samuel Hodges. So this is Samuel Hodges, Coast Guard, the grandfather of my great-grandfather. If you click on this details button, the magnifying glass, it'll give you this. This will tell you the year it was printed. You won't see that on Ancestry, which is incredibly frustrating. And it gives you all the other location information. But if you look at map reference, it'll help you find where the dwelling is on a handy dandy map, which I'll show you in a moment. Now, if you go and click on this button, it will show you the original. So this is what the original record looks like. There is another button next to this one for map view, which, let me go down. On this page, you have the occupiers, who they're leasing from, I should say, and the description of where they're living. Here we got Samuel Hodges. He's renting from the Earl of Meath. He has a house and a garden. Now, if I wanted to know where it was, I would click on the map tool. This is an interactive mapping thing that's really cool. So in that reference where it said 1, this is 1. So you have to zoom in a good bit to find it. But he is in the town of Bray. What I found particularly interesting is that it shows right here where the Coast Guard station was, which, like I said, he was in the Coast Guard. So that kind of gives me an idea of like, okay, he could walk to work. There's also a ferry hill there, which I find really, really awesome and hilarious. That is now a parking lot. And there was also a school nearby for the kids to walk to. There's also this modern map thing. You can make the historical map a little bit more transparent to help you find, okay, where am I going again? But you can also see what's there now. The Tie of the Plowman books, like I said, they're on the National Archives of Ireland's website. If you click on this button that says click here, you can search. So just to show you an example, I searched Nagle in the county of Waterford, and it gives me about 9 results. So if I was to click on one, it would bring me to the original page. This will really, like I said, it just puts someone in a place at a time. So other land records, we're not going to get into this in great detail, but you can find some deeds online. You can find some estate records through the National Library of Ireland. Some of that stuff is not online, the estate records, but the deeds, you can find those to an extent through family search, through the full text search. So the full text search, which if anyone wants to know more about that, we could talk about it during Q&A, but I just searched Garrett Nagle in quotations, and then I filtered it down to County Waterford, and it gives me these results. And then it is an index. So we have Garrett Nagle down here. He's the grantor. This would be Margaret Nagle Moore's father, Garrett Nagle, and who the grantee is. And this is from 1842. So pretty cool. Court records, a lot of court records were destroyed, but we do have some. So as far as how you find some of these, what you're going to want to look for are the calendar of wills and administrations. These are going to be like typed out transcripts or some summarizations of these wills. You do have others on Find My Past and Family Search. Crony, they have some as well. Those are not online, I don't believe. There's also the Registry of Deeds. So the Ireland Calendar of Wills and Administrations. So I looked this up on Find My Past. And I looked actually for Margaret Moore's mother, Mary Jane Nagle. So in 1852, we do have a record for her, and she was deceased by that point. It gives her date of death, where she died, who the executor is, which was Margaret Moore, and her husband, John Henry Moore. Now, if you click on the link, it brings you back to the National Archives website. This is just some tiny index information. If you click image, brings you to the original. And notice we have Mary Jane and her husband, Garrett, directly above her. And is detailing who's getting what and how much and all that good stuff. So the Assizes Court and Quarter Sessions records, most of these have been destroyed. Sometimes you can find some substitutes, but a lot of them were destroyed in 1922, and then the Circuit Court replaced those in 1924. So what those are going to cover are your kind of big baddies, like murder and capital offenses. You'll also have some agrarian unrest and riots, property theft and assault, treason and sedition. Those are going to be in the Assizes Court. And then other things like debt collection and theft of livestock and liquor licensing issues and land disputes. Those were done by the Quarter Sessions. Now, I mentioned a lot of things were destroyed. So the Assizes, most of those were gone in 1922. Quarter Sessions, better survival rates, but it varies county to county. Also, records are a little bit better. We got a lot going on here. Petty sessions, those have survived. I'm trying to go fast because we're out of time. But what's in the records? Basically, your less important things. So Mary Jane Nagle, just to show you a quick example, because I know we're running short on time. Mary Jane Nagle, that was Margaret Moore's mother, as I mentioned. She does come up in the petty session court records. The reason why I want to show you this example is because it's from 1852, and look at what the original page looks like. And we're wondering why a lot of the court records are not around. There are ways of getting around some of these issues. Look at newspapers. Newspapers are your friend. I found things about Margaret Moore herself from when she went to prison for protesting during the land wars. But those records of her court case are gone. They were destroyed. But we do have something in the newspaper. As far as what this was about, basically, someone broke into Mary Jane's house. This is just detailing the robbery. That was thrown out because no one showed up to court. Now, this person is actually from my mother's side of the family. His name is Henry Sennett. So this is from 1862. He is a defendant in a petty sessions court case. He was from County Wexford. What I love about this one, though, is what he did. So he went over to his neighbor's house and started tearing apart the neighbor's roof and harassing the neighbor's wife. Basically, there are many court records of this man and this man's neighbor where they were fighting. I found another one where he lit the thatch roof on fire. So sometimes you can find some really juicy and kind of comical things in these petty session court cases. So newspapers. Okay, so you'll have your national papers and you'll have your local papers. Most of these papers are going to be on Irish Newspaper Archive, which is subscription based. Yeah, the British Newspaper Archive and Find My Past. Those kind of live within each other. They're both subscription based, but you can get into them for free if you're visiting us at the Genealogy Center. As long as you're on our Wi-Fi, you can get into both those for free. But you also want to look at maybe local library microfilm collections, JSTOR, the National Library of Ireland. They have a newspaper collection, but these aren't online. So if you're not in Ireland, that's not going to help you much. So stick with these three up at the top: the Irish Newspaper Archive, British Newspaper Archive, and Find My Past. Research strategies: look at all the spelling name variants of everyone that you're researching. Check papers from both where someone's from and where they're going, where they ended up. I found an obituary for Marguerite Moore in County Waterford. She didn't die until 1933. She had been in the country since 1884, but someone got wind that she died and wrote this really vague obituary about her, asking the town if anyone remembered her. So look in all the places. So just a quick thing I mentioned earlier when it comes to doing immigration research, you want to look at the newspaper. This is just an example. In the 18th century, you had in the ship news sections of the paper, you'll have vessels coming in and vessels leaving, and it'll list the names of some of those people on those vessels. The ones to start with would be these ones listed here. So the Belfast Newsletter, Freeman's Journal, and Gore's Liverpool General Advertiser. Those are the good ones for doing like immigration research. This is just advertisements from some early pre-famine advertisements encouraging people to immigrate, seeking adventure, all that good stuff. Where you'll find some of that, if you're on Find My Past, if you scroll down the page, if you're, say, visiting us, this is what this would look like. You would click on newspaper publications and you can search in there. British Newspaper Archive, this is what their homepage looks like. I would be kind of vague searching in Find My Past in general because their search algorithm is really, really tight and it can actually end up filtering out things that you're looking for. Other key resources: workhouse and poor law records. Military, we're not going to get into these too far in depth because we are out of time, but the workhouse and poor law records, these live on Find My Past. Definitely look at these. People you wouldn't expect to be in those institutions were there. So how to get to them, the way I get to things like that is I click on all record sets up here. I'll type poor and then where Ireland, and it gives you a list of all the different types of poorhouse records. So I found my great-great-grandfather, Robert Hodges, in 1881 in the Dublin Workhouse Administration discharge registers. And I know it's more than likely him because he's the right age. He was a porter for the railroad. He's Protestant. So I have to wonder why he was there. Now, when you open the original image, notice this is pretty damaged. So keep in mind, if you're not finding things, it's because of things like this. Things get destroyed. When you zoom in a good bit, you'll see him down here, Robert Hodges, 18, English, porter, it's occupation, and it says Protestant right here. Now, when you go to the other side, this just says where he's living and when he got out. So this column is when he died or left the workhouse. So he left by October of 81. Military records, you are going to find a lot of military records on Find My Past. Find My Past is kind of the place to go for this kind of thing. The National Archives for the UK, their catalog It has the stuff. I promise it has things. It is just really hard to use. If you wanted to do that kind of thing, send me an email, genealogy@acpl.info. I'll give you some tips. There's also military archives as well. And Ancestry.com has British Army and Royal Irish Constabulary records as well. And there's also the Dublin Metropolitan Police. That's at the National Archives. So if you wanted to look at military records on Find My Past, if you go into Find My Past catalog the way I showed you just a moment ago when talking about poorhouse records, if you just filter to Ireland and search military, you'll have all these that come up. So there's 17 of them, and they all vary on what flavor of military and what era. You can do the exact same thing in Ancestry's catalog. Again, click search, click catalog. I filtered it down to military, and I went down to location and filtered it to Ireland. So there are 19 of these collections that you can search through. Local resources. When in doubt, contact the local libraries in that area. Contact local historical societies. Contact the heritage centers too. Contact them. Not everything is online, right? And if you have the time and resources, maybe plan a trip. It's a good reason to go. And the last thing, when in doubt, just try DNA testing. I'm not going to dwell on this at all because this is an entirely different presentation in itself. If you have questions on doing DNA research for Irish stuff, send us an email. But your best bet is to do an autosomal DNA test through something like Ancestry.com or MyHeritage or 23andMe, because it's the most useful for up to 5 to 7 generations back. So that's what I would do. If you have very specific issues, maybe a Y test or a mitochondrial test following your father's line or your mother's line, that might help you. Okay, just as a very quick recap, I made this handy dandy thing of the free Irish online resources, what they are, what's there, and some special features. This is in the handout. And then I made a comparison for all of those subscription platforms. Notice all of them, aside from Roots Ireland and the Irish Newspaper Archive, you can get into when you were at the Genealogy Center. So if you come visit us, you can get into all these things for free. Okay, that was a lot. I know I went over time, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn my camera on and see what questions we have. Okay, so I'm going to preface this by saying that if I don't get to your question, please send us an email, genealogy@acpl.info. I'm going to put that in the chat. Also, if you need a copy of the chat, send us an email for that as well. Okay, so the first question, I am thinking about taking a trip to Ireland this year. Yes, you should do it. I know the county my grandparents came from, and I know the names of my second great grandparents. Where do I start? They were from County Monaghan. Okay, Kate, so I have some ideas, but I think I need a little bit more information as far as like dates go. So why don't you send us an email and maybe we can talk about maybe how you might be able to find exactly where they're from. So I'm going to go ahead and put our email in the chat again, but that's a good question. A lot of people want to go back to Ireland, back to the mothership, so to speak, to find where their people were from, but they want to know where. So if you have a little information like that and you want some advice, send us an email for that and we can give you a little bit of advice. So the next person, I have an ancestor left County Armagh with his wife and arrived in Pennsylvania 1790 to 1800. His marriage record is listed with Church of Ireland in Armagh, but he was Presbyterian. Sometimes you would see that where you would have Presbyterians being registered with the Church of Ireland. It's just because they were the ruling class, essentially. If you want some more specific suggestions about what all that might mean, my colleague John Beatty, he is our other expert in Irish research, and he is a wizard with the 18th century Irish stuff, especially for Protestants. Send us an email. John might be able to give you some like kind of good thoughts on that. Would someone who fought for the Union during the U.S. Civil War automatically become a citizen? I believe that was a thing. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that in the chat, but I believe that was a thing. It's just a matter of whether or not they claimed it. But that is why a lot of people in that era immigrated and then immediately enlisted. And you also had at the ports people representing the Union Army like trying to usher these men to go immediately enlist. They're offering them food, they're offering them clothes, they're essentially offering them work. And if they're getting citizenship out of it too, why not? Okay. So would someone born in the US whose parents were immigrants normally need to complete a naturalization application, or is it automatic for them? If they are born in the US, they are a native citizen of the United States, they would not need to do any kind of naturalization paperwork. They shouldn't need to. But maybe look for a passport application, see if they traveled. Okay, so that one was answered. Okay, where can I find Catholic records from the 1850s in Connecticut? So the Family Search Research Wiki is a really good resource for finding like where things live. If you honest to God do a Google search, Catholic Records Connecticut Family Search, that should be able to come up. But if you send us an email, now I'm going to sound like a broken record here. If you send us an email with a little bit more specifics on what you're looking for, we might be able to give you some better suggestions, more specific suggestions for you. Okay. I'm going to take like two more questions, and then we're going to finish up for this evening. But like I said, if I don't get to your question, please send us an email. I want to answer your questions. One set of my fifth grade grandparents came from Ulster in the mid to late 1700s to Chester County, South Carolina. How difficult will it be to find information about them? It won't be easy. None of it is easy. None of it's easy at all. But you still might be able to find at least some stuff. So, not to say it again, but send us an email with some more information, like names, any more specific information you have, and maybe either myself or my colleague John can give some suggestions. Okay. Okay, man, a lot of you guys have really early Irish questions. All right, so I'm going to take the last question now, which is, so the poorhouse records on Find My Past have to be searched individually. Would you still find your ancestor if you do a general search for your person and is filtered to location? So yes. So Find My Past, you can, if you do a general search for like just searching all records, you can find these things, absolutely. I personally like to search individual records sometimes because it can be a little overwhelming. But the key to searching and Find My Past is to always check off the box that says name variations under both given name and surname. And when you're filtering to location, try to filter, if you're going to filter to location at all, beyond just simply Ireland, filter to the county. If you try to go smaller, you might accidentally filter out things that you want to see because they have a really tight search algorithm. And what I mean by that is that if you're searching on Ancestry, you get thousands of results of things that are not even related to what you're searching. Find My Past doesn't do that. So less is actually more when you're doing that kind of search in Find My Past. I hope that helps. Okay. That was a fast and furious hour. And thank you everyone for sticking with me this entire time. If you would like a copy of the chat, or if you have more questions, please send us an email. I'm putting a link to the handout in the chat. If anyone needs the handout again, though, send us an email for that as well. But thank you again for tuning in. I hope all of you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks. Bye.